Hey. You're expecting someone different. I was thinking about doing I feel like a quick costume change would have made sense, but I didn't, It's hard in this weather, You can only bring so many layers, but I want to start today's message off by just saying kind of a simple statement, and then I want to spend the rest of our time together unpacking that. And basically the statement is this: I believe that we all possess an inner knowing, or maybe this inner sense of what path to take, or maybe what things are going to be healthy for us. What are some of the things that we can do in order to grow in life? I think that it's there. I think we know on some level, but we also experience blocks. We experience some baggage. We experience some inhibitors or walls that prevent us from moving forward in the direction that we know would be most life-giving for us. We have these things that we know, hey, I should be doing this, and yet we have reasons why we kind of, we make excuses or whatever. For example, how many of us would say, yeah, I wish I meditated more, And then there's a part of you that knows that if you were to sit down and meditate, there would be a voice in your head, and it'd be like, so you're just going to sit here for a half hour and do nothing? Like, how productive are you if you're just literally sitting here and you're like, okay, I can't do this. Or maybe there's a part of you that feels like, yeah, I would love to travel more and see the world and have new experiences. And that voice comes in there again, and it's like, oh, so you want to travel? Do you know how expensive that is? Okay, you're going to pay all this money, you're going to fly all the way to Greece, and then you're going to realize you don't even like Greece, So it's like, don't do it. Or maybe there's a part of you that's like, I should read some more books. And then that voice comes in again. It's like, what's better than reading? TV. And you know what's better than TV? Facebook. Just don't do it. Or maybe there's a part of you that knows, you know what? I could work on being a better partner. How can I grow in my relationship? And that voice comes in again. And it's like, but if you do that, you're going to have to give up on being right all the time. And I don't think we want to go down that road. So let's cut that off. But this kind of stuff comes up even when we least expect it. This week I signed up to go on a yoga and meditation retreat out of the country, and that's like a big step for me. But I was like, no, don't. The story gets different. It's don't applaud me. And so at first I'm thinking like, oh, this is so great. And look, I know I need to be doing these kind of things for myself, and like I did it. And then immediately all these thoughts came in, and it was like, oh, this is going to be a long flight. What if you don't like your seat? Or what if you do get the window seat, which you like, but then the person in the aisle falls asleep and you have to go to the bathroom and you don't want to wake them up, so you hold it for 6 hours. Or maybe you get to the retreat and then you have a roommate and they snore. Maybe you snore, and that's even worse because it's embarrassing. And all these thoughts came in. And friends, this is why we need to look at our blocks. We need to understand those blocks, that's not who you are in your deepest self. And on some level, we need to trust that there is a voice that's leading us, and we can understand that those blocks are things that we can work through and we can ultimately let go of. And I think one of those things that we all know on some level that we need, that inner voice is guiding us towards, is community, is relationship, is connection. And of course, there are blocks that are going to come up when it comes to our ability to engage in community. I grew up in Southern California, which means I learned to drive a little bit differently than everyone else. I did some research this week. I found just in the area of Southern California that I grew up in, there are over 70 freeways. And what that essentially meant is that if you learn to drive in Southern California, what you learn is that if there was any kind of roadblock, if there was any kind of construction or any kind of traffic or accident, you just got off on the next exit and found the next available freeway, right? It was as easy as that. Of course, that's why it led to all these aggressive drivers just competing over who was going to get to the shortcut as fast as they could. But when I moved to Seattle, and then, of course, when I moved to here, I found that there are actually places in the world where you can't just always take a shortcut, or you can't just escape. Sometimes, if you're stuck in some kind of issue or there's a roadblock ahead, you just need to let it pass. You just need to wait till your turn, and you just need to figure out, okay, I needed to go through. I can't go around. And I think this is true of life. This is true of our spiritual journeys, and this is true of our community journeys, that there are things that we can't just avoid, we can't just shortcut, that we need to figure out. Sometimes we need to go through. We need to experience our blocks, and we need to let go of them. And really, this series has been about the fact that we cannot shortcut the process of community. And so if you're with us last week, you saw that we talked about this first stage in the process, this movement that we call pseudo-community into chaos. And basically, to recap, pseudo-community is when we start and we begin the work of community, but of course, things are still kind of surface level. We're still, things feel a little safe, but it's also because we're avoiding conflict, we're avoiding truly being known, and we're avoiding vulnerability, which ultimately, if we're able to get past that stage, we are launched into a stage called chaos. And chaos is when everything is out in the open. Our blocks, our hang-ups, our pain, our differences, it's out in the open, and of course, it's a little chaotic because we haven't exactly figured out what to do with them yet. But there is a value in this stage. See, we know that we can't be healthy if we don't know what's going on inside of us. This is true emotionally, that often we have things happening under the surface that we don't even understand. And sometimes it can take an outburst or something to actually point us towards the path of health. This is also true physically. This is why symptoms can actually be really helpful for us, because they show us things that are happening beneath the surface that we may not have even known about. When I was growing up, I had some skin problems and some acne, and so my mom was there to help me through that, and she was always, basically bringing me new medications to try, but the problem was that she would just have me try a new medication every 2 weeks, which never gave me an opportunity to actually let one medication do its work, and so I would keep asking her, why is it getting worse all the time? And she was like, no, it's okay. It's supposed to get worse before it gets better, because, it's just bringing all the bad stuff out. And I was like, okay, I trust you, even though it feels a little weird that we're constantly changing medications. And then one day she read something on the internet, which is, it's how you find new remedies these days. You just find it on Facebook. And this remedy was this. She said, okay, I know it sounds crazy, but we're going to put more oil on your face, and then that oil is going to attract the oil underneath the surface, and it's going to pull all the oil out, okay? But it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I'm like, okay, how much more of this can I do, right? But we did it, and of course it got worse, and I was like, what's going on? She's like, it's. And then I realized as I grew up, I was like, okay, I just need to wash my face more. It's changing medications that often is just a bad thing. But the reason I mention this is because I do think that when it comes to community, when it comes to relationship, when it comes to this stage of chaos, sometimes it feels like it's going to get worse before it gets better, because in this case, it is true that we need to see things come to the surface before we can deal with them, before we can know what our next steps are going to be. And so today, what I hope our practice can be together is just to pay attention to the things that come to the surface, and then do that work of letting them go. And this is what we call the movement from chaos into the stage of emptiness. Part of this framework we've been working through is developed by the author, psychologist M. Scott Peck, and he says this about the stage of emptiness. Emptiness is the hard part. It is also the most crucial stage of community development. It is the bridge between chaos and community. When the members of a group finally ask me to explain what I mean by emptiness, I tell them simply that they need to empty themselves of barriers to communication. What are those barriers to communication? Now, that word communication is interesting because I think it really goes in two directions. When we're talking about communicating, we're talking about being able to hear someone else and also to be heard, to be able to communicate our own feelings and thoughts and to be able to receive someone else's. We talked earlier in this series about the health of a system, whether that system is out in nature, whether that system is our body, or whether that system is a community. The health of a system is It's coherence, is the level of healthy communication that is happening within the system. And so when we think about health in our lives and how we engage in community, I just invite you to think about this. What are the barriers that you might experience to hearing another and to sharing with another? And that word empty, it might be maybe a little challenging for you. You're thinking, I don't want to think about what I have to let go of. I want to hold on, right? Like, you're like, this is America. We hold on to things here, you know. We don't let go of things. So maybe, you know, particularly for the men in the room, maybe there's this masculinity thing where we think, oh, letting go is weakness, you know. But I love what the spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle says about letting go. He says, sometimes letting things go is an act of far greater power than defending or hanging on. See, defending, holding on to things, can be rooted in fear. This fear of, well, what would happen if I let this part of myself go? Who would I be if I let this go? And so it can actually be an incredibly courageous act to let go, because you're trusting that who you truly are will be there to meet you on the other side. And so today, I just want to talk about 3 barriers that come up in community. Of course, they come up in our relationships. They even come up within our own self-understanding. And certainly these 3 are not the only barriers that we are ever going to experience with community, but I think they're important starting points that we have the opportunity to empty ourselves of, so I can hear you, you can hear me. And the first is this. It's very likely that we all come into community with some level of desiring control. We want to stay in control. For me, I'm a worrier, okay? And I think with me, worry, it's this dynamic where we try to predict the future, and then we try to kind of figure out the worst possible outcome, so at least we feel like we'll be prepared, okay? Which makes us kind of like negative psychics, you know, which is a terrible business model. But we tend to predict and project the worst future because on some level, we feel like we're, at the very least, we're still in control. We're not going to be surprised. And so we go through life, and really the mechanism of control are these expectations that we walk around with. But expectations are really, really difficult in how they affect community. Peck says it this way: until such time as we can empty ourselves of expectations and stop trying to fit others and our relationships with them into a preconceived mold, we cannot really listen, hear, or experience. Expectations, they put a filter between us and reality so that we don't see people or we don't fully hear people. We see our idea of how they should be or how they're failing to live up to that idea. For those of you who are in long-term relationships or are married, you've probably discovered that part of the work of growing together is learning to continually drop your expectations of that other person, the ways that you've decided they're supposed to be versus who they are, how they're showing up in life. And if you can do that with your partner, certainly you can begin to do that in community. See, if we were to look around, and I get to see all of you, but you can look around right now, and we see all these different faces, so many people with so many different experiences, and yet we all, on some level, come into this room, and we place expectations on how other people ought to behave. And in fact, without even realizing it, you've placed some expectations on me, some that you maybe don't even know. For example, you all have an expectation that on a Sunday morning, I'm not going to show up here in my pajamas, okay? You didn't know that you had that expectation, but now that I've said it, you're like, I guess that's true. Or you have an expectation that, you know, many of you went and got coffee this morning, and you have an expectation that I'm not going to come up here and say, guess what? It's all decaf, okay? Because that would be like a crisis that we wouldn't be able to work through. Or you all have this expectation that if, you know, when it's time for greeting and we go to say hello to new people, you have this expectation that a stranger isn't going to come up to you and kiss you on your mouth. You know what I mean? It's like, these are good expectations. These are healthy expectations. Don't get me wrong. But the problem with expectations is that we extend our expectations far beyond that, and most of the time without realizing it, to the degree that no one can ever live up to the expectations that we've extended out into the world. And so we end up constantly disappointed or frustrated. But there's a great old saying that really fits in this circumstance. If no one is measuring up, check your yardstick. Ooh. Look within. Stop looking outside of yourself. Because that mechanism of control and us projecting on other people is often really our own fear of failure, our own fear of being seen, our own fear of not being enough. And another one of the ways that we tend to try to remain in control of our fear of failure is by not trying at all, by not risking at all. So think about a small group and joining a small group, or think about, volunteering more, or think about even just going up and talking to someone you haven't met. These are all things that have some inherent level of risk in them. And often we just take a step back and we say, I can remain in control by not putting myself in that position at all. But if you never take the opportunities that maybe have some degree of risk with them, you're never going to experience true community. The need for control to ensure the desired outcome is at least partially rooted in the fear of failure. For me to empty myself of my overcontrolling tendencies, I must continually empty myself of this fear. I must be willing to fail. When is the last time that you came into this room and you introduced yourself to someone you had never met and maybe invited a deeper conversation, shared something vulnerably with them? When's the last time that you came to Aldea and in some way or another you were willing to fail? The second barrier that comes up between us and that experience of community is our desire for safety. See, this comes from our evolution and our survival instinct that throughout history, as we've evolved as a species, we've really gained this incredible ability to make snap judgments. You can think about our ancestors roaming through the forest thousands of years ago, and they need to be able to quickly decide, are those berries safe to eat or are they going to be poisonous? Or they see a rattling in a bush over there and they're like, I need to make a snap judgment. Is that a tiger or is that just a bird? These are important things. The problem is that our brains have not caught up to the fact that our world is a little bit different than the hunter-gatherer world of our ancestors. And so we tend to extend that ability to make snap judgments onto people, onto situations. And this manifests itself in something that the best word for is prejudice. That word prejudice is basically, if you break it down, just means to prejudge. And when we most commonly use that word, we're talking about prejudging entire groups of people. But it's also true in a more subtle way in our experiences of community. That we have all walked into this room and without realizing it, made some prejudgments about one another. And it's not because we're all jerks, it's just because this is our survival brains. And yet, it is an important thing that we have the opportunity to empty ourselves of. See, prejudices tend to evaporate when we spend enough time getting to know people in order for our judgments to be proven false. It's easy to walk in this room and maybe look at someone and say, I can sort of predict what their worldview is like or what a conversation with them might be like. I can maybe even predict really what I think their life has been like. But in reality, those predictions tend to be proven false, or it tends to be a lot more complex than we think when we create the time and space to get to know someone. That's why small groups are just a great start, is because it's the time and it's the space to allow those things that depth to be created. The third way or the third barrier between us and an experience of true community is this desire to be right. Rightness, okay? And I want to illustrate this point, I want to tell a joke, and I want to just be clear, I didn't create this joke, I wish I had, but this joke comes from the author and philosopher Peter Rollins, and the joke goes like this, okay? 3 people have died, and they arrive at the pearly gates of heaven. So St. Peter's there, and he says, look, we're going to bring you in one by one, and you're all going to get to talk to Jesus, and he's going to tell you kind of what life was and what's the truth, what's going on here, right? And they're like, great. And so out of these 3 people, there's a mystic, and there is an evangelical megachurch pastor, and then there's like a fire and brimstone fundamentalist preacher, okay? So the mystic goes in first, and he's in there for about a half an hour, okay? And he comes out, and he has a huge smile on his face. He's just beaming, and he says, I just knew that I was wrong. And then and then the megachurch pastor goes in, and he's in there for 45 minutes, and he comes out, and he's just, it's like he's seen a ghost. He's just mortified and sad. And he says, I couldn't believe I was so wrong. And then lastly, the fire and brimstone fundamentalist preacher, he marches in there confidently, and he's in there for an hour and a half. And then Jesus comes out looking distraught, and Jesus says, how did I get it all so wrong? Whether we realize it or not, we have this drive within us to get others to see things the way that we see it, to convert others to our side. It can feel very safe and secure if others see things like us. In fact, there are entire communities that are built around this principle. There are entire communities that exist to surround themselves with those who see the things like they do. And there's a reason for this. Peck goes into this. He says, if your theology or ideology is different from mine, it calls mine into question. It's uncomfortable for me to be uncertain of my own understanding in such basic matters. On the other hand, if I could convert you to my way of thinking, it would not only relieve my discomfort, it would be further proof of the rectitude of my beliefs and cast me in the role of savior to boot. How much easier and nicer that would be than extending myself to understand you as you are. I will send those claps to the author. I'm going to send an email. I'm like, that quote got good claps. Okay. This desire for control and safety, it extends into our desire for rightness, that we feel in control, we feel safe if we can reinforce our position. How many of us can maybe recognize that we've even done this in maybe some small ways that it's hard to even realize, that we're kind of wanting to convert people into our way of seeing or our way of thinking? You've probably had a conversation like this, okay? You're talking to a friend, and you're saying, you know what TV show is fantastic? The Crown. I don't know what TV shows you guys watch, but I'm just guessing maybe some of you have seen The Crown. I don't know. What's the show that everyone watches? There you go. I guessed right. There you go. And you're telling your friend, you know what's so great? The Crown. And your friend says, I've never seen it. I'll have to watch it. And then you get back together with them a week later, and they say, you know what? I watched The Crown, and it was amazing. And you're like, yeah, of course it was. I have great taste. But what if you got back together after a week, and they said, you know, I tried watching The Crown, but I absolutely hated it? You'd probably say, well, I guess, unfortunately, we can't be friends anymore because I don't know, you obviously hate me. So this is because we want to have stronger certainty over our position. I do this all the time. I don't know, how many of you have an air fryer? Not that many. Okay. All right. I can work with this. Upon getting an air fryer, I've become religious about the air fryer and evangelistic about the air fryer. But I'm realizing it's because I use the air fryer a little too much, okay? Like, the air fryer is not meant for everything, but I use it for everything. And I think deep down there's some insecurity about that. But when anyone comes into my house, I say, have you seen the air fryer? And they go, oh, no. I'm like, well, let me tell you about the air fryer. And then I spend the next 10 minutes really preaching about the wonderful opportunities of the air fryer. But here's the thing. I realize I'm just trying to convince them so I feel better about my own insecurities, okay? But I think we do this all the time. We are converting, we are even saving, and maybe we are even trying to fix. And friends, don't get me wrong, it's not that every time we try to help someone, every time we try to fix someone, it's actually to protect ourselves from our own insecurities. But it's important to remember when we come into community, and we think about this sense of, I need to just convince everyone to see things my way. Sometimes it can be a mechanism of protecting ourselves from our own uncertainty. See, sometimes we end up surrounded by people who we've just converted. So we end up surrounded by people who look and think exactly like us. And really, it ends up as an echo chamber where we're never challenged to grow. We're never challenged to think about things in a different way. Alternatively, we can create spaces where our uniquenesses, our differences are celebrated, and because of that, we can grow and we can heal. And instead of just trying to go around and convert one another to your point of view, we actually become curious about other points of view and how they can better our own lives and our own experiences. So what now? How do we actually do this? What is the work? Peck really emphasizes this important aspect of the stage of emptiness that he calls the sharing of brokenness. That there's this act of emptying in which we just share with one another our humanity. We say, yeah, these are my expectations that have gotten in the way, or this is some of the way that my prejudice has manifested, or this is some of the way that I've been afraid, or this is how I've tried to just be right all the time. He says, as the group moves into emptiness, a few of its members begin to share their own brokenness, their defeats, failures, doubts, fears, inadequacies, and sins. They begin to stop acting as if they had it all together as they reflect on those things they need to empty themselves of. That in order to truly listen, they have to truly empty themselves, even of their distaste for bad news. If they don't, it becomes necessary for me to point out to its members that they are discouraging the sharing of brokenness. A couple months back, we had a question and response Sunday where people were encouraged to submit some just thoughts and questions, and a few of us on stage just kind of responded. And there was something that someone shared that really stuck with me, and I don't want to harp on it, but it was anonymous, so I think I'm okay here. And basically, this person in their response said, I'm curious about the direction of Aldea because it feels a little bit like it's turning into group therapy. And I've thought a lot about this because, the reality is, friends, it's hard to be human. It is very complicated to be human. And when I think about what it means to show up in community authentically, I cannot imagine a version of true community in which we avoid grieving together, in which we avoid sharing the complexities and the difficulties of being human together. And yet I think what happens when we stop avoiding is it just naturally flows. And there's this sense that it's not something that we need to do so much as it's something that we need to stop doing. There's this concept within Taoism called, Wu Wei. And Wu Wei essentially means the doing of not doing, or action that is inaction. And it's inspired by this verse in the Tao. And part of this verse says, do nothing and everything is done. That there is an aspect and a way that we can approach life in which it's not constantly trying to control, it's not constantly trying to do, it's not constantly trying to insert ourselves, but it's in the letting go, it's in the emptying ourselves of the need to control that life actually happens. So let me stop trying to control. Let me stop trying to fix. Let me stop trying to convert. Let me stop trying to turn all my expectations into reality. Let me stop making judgments. Let me stop avoiding the sharing of brokenness. And maybe then we will start to experience the depth that is possible in community. But this level of laying all these things down, it can feel a bit like a death. And we've spoken a lot here about how there is this beautiful cycle in nature. It's all around us. It's cosmic, and it's really this cycle of life, death, resurrection, that every death is followed by a resurrection. And so even in our moments of laying everything down and not knowing what's next, there is at least the hope for something beyond. The 14th century Sufi poet Hafiz, he has this beautiful poem in which he speaks of really what can happen when we lay everything down at the altar of love. He says, "Love is the funeral pyre where I have laid my living body. All the false notions of myself that once caused fear, pain, have turned to ash as I neared God." What if community was one of those vehicles of love for us to come to and allow everything that stands in the way, to allow the fears and the pain, to allow that to be turned to ash? I want to close with this. There's a Buddhist proverb that says, "The value of a cup is its emptiness." When I think about us as a community, and really if you were to walk away from this place and you have all these different communities that you're a part of, I hope that you can take some of this and apply it there. It's not just about what happens here, but when I do think about us as a community, I think about what we can bring, what we can give to the world, what our value is. And I'm really encouraged and even challenged to think about our value in this way. How open and receptive can we be? How much can we listen to others and their pain without needing to fix it? How much space can we create for those who don't see things the exact way that we do? Maybe if we can do all of that, maybe that is how we fully embody our motto of love, period.